Hello, headphone mixers. My name is Paul Third, and that man across from me is Emrah Celik, award-winning mix and mastering engineer with over 3 billion streams to his name, with over 90% of those mixes coming from headphones. Now, this week we are going to talk about a little bit of a controversial topic. I never thought DACs would be controversial, but we are going to talk about DACs and basically the reality of DACs and whether you need to worry about them, what you need to worry about, if you need to worry about them at all. Let's get into it. So I'll give you my kind of opinion first. What I believe is that in regards to a DAC, I think a DAC isn't the biggest bottleneck of your headphone setup. I would say in a headphone setup, it goes headphones, it goes amp. Then you'd probably say EQ, then it would probably go to your DAC. The reason I would say a DAC isn't, and especially in modern day times, isn't that much of a bottleneck is because the DAC quality is so high and you don't need to pay an arm and a leg for a really good DAC. You can pick up like a topping DX3 Pro Plus. It's like 150 quid, £200 or whatever it is. You can pick up really affordable, well implemented DACs and you don't need to spend an arm and a leg. For you, Emrah, what's your opinion on DACs for headphone mixing?
I completely agree with everything you said about it because, even Apple dongle, that little dongle, has a decent measurements and sounds good. So as a mix engineer or mastering engineer, I wouldn't worry about DACs too much. But if we can hear any difference, yes, we can, because the implementation of the different DACs and different chips and the circuitry make some very slight differences. But today in modern world, even the cheapest sound cards are good enough to work with as a DAC.
Yeah. Now, there has been some controversy talking about, and I will just kind of address this quick and just kind of, let's just go bash it out of the park here. So there has been a few videos by people like AP Mastering and then certain people following on from that talking about DACs and how DACs are a scam and how all DACs sound the same. If you do a DAC and do a loop back, so you loop a DAC to an ADC and record that back, you will notice that if you null the files, I've done it on my channel, you will notice that you don't even add 0.1 dB of a difference. So then that would tell you, well, you can get a cheap DAC and there's going to be absolutely no difference whatsoever. Right, I just need to clear this up very quickly. I've done my own tests. I've done scientific tests, physical tests. So doing a DAC to ADC, so running the DAC into an ADC, a line input and then recording that, yes, that loop back will result in a 0.1 dB difference, not even a 0.1 dB difference. And that's because you're running the DAC into itself, essentially, or you're running it into another converter. There's no physical interaction going on. And that's something that I didn't know really existed until I did a physical test in my studio. So I took the Edifier S3000 Mark IIs and I pointed my measurement microphone 20 centimeters from the tweeter. And I decided to do a few Room EQ Wizard measurements. And interestingly, I did see a difference. So I had one interface that was £300 and I had another interface that was around £300. One of them was quite well known for having a very well implemented DAC. The other one basically kind of seen as like your budget interface, but it could kind of do a lot of things. Now the brand is irrelevant here, right? Because what I'm way to tell you about my results are the most important. So what I found is that frequency response wise, the deviations would be just as similar as if you were to take 3 or 4 measurements in your room. You're always going to have slight variations. That's just the way it works. But what I did notice was when I looked at the decay time of the speakers in my room, so specifically pointing at the tweeters, and so I was measuring more of the direct sound because I'm measuring the tweeter closer, so 20 centimeters from the tweeter. So I've got less of the room interaction and I'm thinking more about the direct sound coming from the speakers. I noticed that the decay in one interface was much, much quicker than the other one. And again, I'll have, screenshots here to show you. And it's not even by a small margin. It's quite a considerable margin. So then obviously me being me, I rabbit holed stuff. And I was like, what is the difference? What is the main difference in a DAC? What could be the most audible thing in a DAC that could interact physically with the speakers or headphones. And then I finally think I cracked the code, and I think I did. The only thing that I would say you really need to consider when you're looking at a DAC for monitoring is the filtering. Now, what you'll see here is that I did a plug-in doctor test, and I basically did a loopback test, DAC into ADC. So what I found was that one was using a minimum phase, which, as you can see in the impulse response here, is creating post-ringing. So when you use minimum phase filters, you get post-ringing. And the other one has what we call pre-ringing. So that tells us that it's using linear phase. Now, there is an audible difference between linear phase and minimum phase. However, when you're in the DAW, you'll find that if you're using plugins and stuff like that, it isn't going to be that much of a difference. The reason we know that is because when we do the DAC to ADC loopback test, it nearly nulls itself out. You know what I mean? The null's very, very, very deep. However, when you are in the physical analog domain and you've got speakers and headphones, especially speakers, your speakers move. There's a physical movement, right? There's air being moved. There's a test that me and Emrah done a long time ago. It was Emrah that taught me this about, I'll leave a link in the description, right? Where if you flip the phase, the polarity, if you flip the polarity, reverse the polarity on, say, like a drum bus, what you can find is that it actually changes the way the air moves in the speaker. So you have speakers moving forward, you have speakers moving back. And yeah, just watch that, and that'll make you realise that there is actually a physical interaction outside of our speakers. So basically the test was, I could do a null. I can get two files to null, but they will sound different in your room, right? So there is a physical interaction that doesn't happen, in the digital domain, or again, doing a DAC to ADC, because it's just running itself. You're basically running the signal into itself. Now, many people told me to be careful about this because, not many people talk about this, but from what I can see from Room EQ Wizard is in having a physical interaction with the tweeter, and it's causing one speaker through one DAC to decay more, and then another DAC, it's causing the speaker to decay less. Now, if you have more decay in your tweeter, what's going to happen is that everything's just kind of going to sound a little bit hazy, because nothing's ever really, your transients and other things aren't really resolving. They're kind of just falling on top of each other. Where when you have a very fast decay time in your room and in your speakers, what you'll find is that transients resolve a lot quicker. And so you feel like you've got more separation. That's kind of what I find, because you've got your transients and then it decays. Transient decays, and you can see that separation. Where if nothing ever really truly decays that much, then it just kind of creates this haze. That's how I hear it when I listen to the two DACs. And for a long time, I thought it was nuts, because I was sure I could hear a difference in one and I could hear a difference in the other. And many people would say, but if you do a DAC to ADC, that's going to tell you that there is no difference. And that's what people say online. So if you do this test, it proves it. I could do these ABs and I could go backwards and forwards, and you can't tell me when I switch. But as we can see in Room EQ Wizard and the measurements, there is a physical difference in the room that a DAC to ADC loopback cannot cater for.
I completely agree with you, because when we think about the band-limited sampling theorem, which is a theorem, right? So you just can't break it. Until you hit the filter, the capture will be perfect. But when you hit the slope of it, when you hit it, it's going to change the way it interacts with the audio and sampling. So until then, you can perfectly capture anything, and it's going to sound exactly the same. But as you said, on the high frequencies, let's say at 10 kilohertz, and then at the same time trying to capture 22 kilohertz, the interaction will be completely different. So that's the main issue that creates the difference in DACs, because the technology and the circuitry is almost the same, right? But if you don't take it the interaction in account, that would be a mistake and bad testing.
Because what you need to realize is that transients, and this is what I was trying to say this to a few people. I was doing a little bit of research on transients. Transients are kind of almost full band, okay? So when you think about a transient, it's a very, very high amplitude peak. But that high amplitude peak has, can in regards to the frequencies that it makes, spreads kind of quite far and wide. And there's some transients that I've read that can apparently, like go up to as much as I read 400, 500 kilohertz. I don't know how a transient could go that high. But if you think about like hi-hats and you think about, very high kind of transients, again, there's octaves to that. And it's a very high peak transient. And again, you can have a lot of information that is interacting with the filter. And when you have this filter, and we call it Nyquist. So Nyquist is basically the end of your bandwidth. So if it's 48 kilohertz, you half that, which means that your bandwidth is going to be up to 24 kilohertz. If you have a sample rate of 96 kilohertz, your bandwidth is going to be up to 48 kilohertz. So if you have frequencies or you have transients that are interacting with the filter, what filters can do is filters can ring. So what you'll find with the FIO K19 and the Topping DX7 Pro Plus that I used to own, it comes with a varying amount of filters. It comes with 7 different filters. And if you look, I'll show you a screenshot here. Emrah from Audio Science Review will show you the filters interacting, right? And you can notice that there's a brick wall filter and there's a lot of ringing that comes off of it. So you can get ringing artifacts, especially with brick wall filters, and you can get some filters that are very slow. So what they'll do is they'll be slower and not as steep, but what will happen is they'll kind of encroach into more of our audible spectrum. Now, what's very important to understand is that as much as you can have ringing in a filter, right, and again, that can impact our transients, right? So if you think about oversampling in a plugin, and many people say, oh, be careful if you use linear phase oversampling, that can impact your transients because you can get pre-ringing. However, pre-ringing has to be pretty severe for it to be audible. But I do find post-ringing could be quite audible if the filter isn't implemented correctly. Especially there's some plugins out there that have, very poorly implemented minimum phase filters where they actually alter the phase quite drastically, where your top end is quite audibly different. So it's very important that the DAC filter itself is very well implemented because it does have a sound. Not as much in, the digital domain, but in the analog domain, as far as I've tested and as far as in terms of my ears, I can hear the difference. So when I used to go through the DX7 Pro Plus, and if I go through the FIO K19 and I go through the DAC filters, I can hear very subtle differences, just more in your transients. But the biggest difference, and the thing that kind of basically brought me to the conclusion that the filter definitely does have a sound, is that I have a Hyphaman EF600, which has a non-oversampling mode. Now, what's interesting is Emrah's got sent the Hyphaman stuff as well, not the EF600, but I think it's the one below.
I can show you. Oh, that's heavy.
Yeah, so that's got a non-oversampling mode as well. And what's interesting is, especially with the EF600, is that you just press a button and you can switch from non-oversampling to oversampling. And the difference is very, very, very obvious. What that definitely shows you is that the filter 100 million% has a sound.
There's also a real cheap DAC here, FIO, which is K11. And this, as you can see, you see R2R. So if we think about the DAC design from the point of the circuitry perspective, not all DACs are designed the same, because these don't use the chips that we used to see on Cirrus Logic, Texas Instruments, AKM, ESS. Those are the chips that use the standard on standard designs. So those are the very popular chips, right? Very famous chips. But these are the different. These are using resistance leather. That's the R2R coming from. And this is completely different type of design. So saying all DACs sound the same doesn't make sense. Scientifically, DACs make difference, as you said, and filters make difference, and it's up to DAC design. But like I said, if they are sharing the same concept, same basics of the DAC, it's not going to be a night and day difference. But from the oversampling to non-oversampling, which is OS and NOS, is is making difference. Is people used to choose R2R DACs as it sounds more analog to them. I don't think like that because, sound is sound. I don't think it's analog or digital or something, but I hear the difference. Clarity is different. The way it's how it's getting dirty make difference. So that's the difference in between DACs.
Yeah, because in terms of the difference that I hear the transients are really, really smeared. It makes things a little bit wider, so the stage is different. Things get a little bit deeper, but the transients are the biggest difference. The transients are almost, sound like they're just shaved off, but it's not shaved off, it's smeared. Everything just sounds like a lot softer. And I can see why many audiophiles like that. They like the sound of that more laid back, softer, smeary, deeper kind of sound stage. But it's not accurate. In the Delta Sigma DAC, or again, most, like 98% of DACs, they're going to be using digital filters, and when you're using digital filters, you can use oversampling, right? Where with the Hyphaman EF600 that I've got in front of me, that has a non-oversampling mode, which is an analog filter. So when it's using its oversampling mode, which is we would class as its normal DAC mode, because that's normally what all the DACs use, and they're using internal oversampling, it's a digital filter. But with the non-oversampling, it's an analog low-pass filter, which in some cases could be quite slow, and you can actually notice that it takes out quite a lot of top end. I don't know exactly the way the filter is in the EF600 and a few other DACs, but again, it's something else that you don't really understand or you don't know. So if you don't know that internal oversampling has a sound in plugins, then you won't know that internal oversampling has a sound with filtering. And, whether it's minimum phase or it's linear phase has a sound. In regards to what Emrah, just to kind of finish this up, because I know people are going to be so bored already. But, is there a difference in physical interaction? If we think about the interaction that a speaker has and the physical interaction that a headphone driver has, is there more of a physical movement in speakers than headphones?
They are actually mini speakers, so it's not going to be too different than the speakers, right? Because the technology is the same. Yeah, there are different drivers, I understand that, but the basics, its interaction is the same. So it could definitely make difference. The same interaction that you told, the phase difference, polarity difference, the way that the speakers, it doesn't matter with driver's execution, front and back, as you said, it's important because the phase you see, the polarity, and the action of the speakers or headphones must be matched in the. I mean, it's not that you have to have a correct phase between kick and bass, right? But you have to have your kicks or any sound in a correct phase with your speakers, especially on the low end, because we are prone to hear differences from 800 hertz and down. Upper mid range and upper higher frequencies doesn't matter too much, but especially the excursion of the speakers, it's going to make a lot of difference for the punch. You're gonna hear more if the polarity is reversed. You're gonna hear more wider and softer, the hits from your kicks and bass. But if it's in the correct phase with your speakers or with your headphones, the interaction will make them sound more punchy, slam. You're gonna get more slam, and that's why it's important, because if your DAC is going to somehow change the phase, you have to always measure and check if it's in the correct phase. You can just route audio and record it and see if there's any change, but I don't think so, because most of the modern DACs are going to be sound perfectly fine. But sometimes happens.
I think what we can end on, right, is basically what we started on. I know we went really in a pure massive geeky tangent, but I just cannot allow people to be misleading others out there and be saying that, yeah, all DACs are the same, all DACs sound the same. They do not sound the same. However, the truth and the reality is that modern DACs, especially your toppings, your FIOs, your SMSLs, and fucking loads and loads of different manufacturers, and a lot of interfaces as well, have good DACs in them. They have well implemented DACs with good filtering. But again, that's a limitation of, you know, some interfaces, you know, and some designs. But genuinely, as I said earlier, a DX3 Pro Plus, even probably a topping fucking DX1 has, you know, good, decent filtering in there. You shouldn't really hear a difference in a good DAC, but there are odd occasions where you are going to hear a difference in a DAC. If you go to the FIO K19 and you play about with the filtering, you will hear a difference with the different filters. But the way they've got it set default is what we would class as the most accurate one, the one that's got the best transients and blah, de blah, de blah. In most cases, it's going to be such a minute difference that you're never really going to hear it, especially if you get a good, decent DAC. But there are differences that are there. You're not crazy. We're not crazy. There is science behind it. Is there anything, Emrah, that you would like to add before we finish up?
Yeah, let's be honest, right? We are living in a legendary time for sampling and DACs and stuff. All the interfaces. It's just good, because I remember back in days, 25 years ago, it was pain in the ass, you know. It was too expensive. It was just, you know, you pay $100 for today's DAC will cost you $3,000-$4,000 like 20 years ago.
And that's how we'll leave it. You don't need to spend that much money. There is a difference in sound. Whether you can hear it or not, I don't know. It's going to be up to you. There is a sound, is what it is. Don't worry about it too much. It's not going to be the thing that's going to make your mixes not translate. Headphone EQs are getting the right headphones is, and again, making sure that they're powered correctly is going to be more important. So yeah, sorry for completely geeking out and boring the absolute tits off you, but that's what we do on this channel. We're audio geeks. So my name is Paul Third, that's Emrah Celik, and we'll see you again in another installment of MixPhones.